Welcome back to another installment of Wordy Wednesdays. Before we get into this, I want to thank you all for all of your good wishes. It really means a great deal to me. It's more than just emotionally comforting. I believe if you put enough good stuff out into the universe will not ignore it. Whether it's God or Buddha or karma or whatever label you want to put on it, I think it's valuable. So thank you. So let me quickly give you the update because I saw my doctor yesterday. This is Bell's palsy. It's not a stroke, and I hadn't thought it was, but I know some of you had suggested the possibility, but no, it's not a stroke. I know other people had suggested Ramsay Hunt. My doctor does not believe that's the case because there would be a few more symptoms that I simply don't have in the case of Ramsay Hunt. But there's no definitive way to prove it one way or another because I had chicken pox, which means a blood test is going to show that I have that virus in my system. So, but my doctor does not believe that's what it is. My doctor believes it's Bell's palsy. She agrees that there is a possibility that it is COVID-19. There is a test for that, but she feels it's more likely that it's Lyme disease. I hadn't considered Lyme disease because I had no reason to believe I have Lyme disease, but I do live in a rural area. Being bitten by a tick and not knowing it is always possible, and my doctor has had a couple of cases of Bell's palsy recently that did come from Lyme disease. So that raises the possibilities because this is my area. So, COVID-19 test. Let me tell you about this. It's not as crazy as that, Cologuard poo test that was, in lieu of the colonoscopy, but it's definitely crazy. My doctor sent a request to the local hospital. They will put the request before a board of nurses, not sure what that's all about. Then they will get back to me, make an appointment. I will go into the hospital, get the test, come home. It's you walk in, walk out. It's no big deal. And then 2 days later, I get the results. That 2 days later thing is the reason I will go through all the crazy making of, hospital and board of nurses, and then they get back to me and la, la, la. Because the other testing centers have a wait time of up to 2 weeks for the results. So this will cut it down to less than a week, which is good. So I am sort of in semi-quarantine right now, which is to say I'm going out for necessary trips only. I'll be wearing a mask wherever I go, but I won't be just going out for the fun of it, which is unfortunate because I like going out, but we will cope. Also, those of you who pointed out the fact that the cat could get COVID, yeah, I know. And I have considered this. I do not want my cat to be sick, nor do I want my cat to be miserable. If I don't pet him, he's miserable. If I do pet him and I have COVID-19, he's sick. It's a really hard choice to make. And I have decided I am just taking the chance because he gets too emotionally distraught if I don't pick him up. And you've seen that. If he doesn't feel like he's getting all the attention, he goes crazy. So imagine not petting a cat like that who's constantly demanding attention. I've told him that what I'm going to try to do is when I spend time with him, I'm going to put on a mask and I'm going to wear gloves and we can cuddle. But unfortunately, it's about the best I can do because it's not as if I can pack him up and send him somewhere else for a few days. And of course, if I do have COVID-19 and he is carrying it, I'm just passing it along to somebody else. And it's a tough situation to be in. So I've just got to hope for the best. I sure don't want my little Audie baby to be sick. But by the same token, I wouldn't do anything to devastate him emotionally, which is what would happen if I'd locked him in the bedroom and didn't spend time with him. So icky. It's one of those really choices, between the devil and the deep blue sea. Which has given me a perfect segue. That is a metaphor, and that is what we are going to talk about today. So, when we come back. All right, before we get into this, because I don't want to forget, one of my friends from the bus service, and as you know, I take the bus wherever I go, and one of my friends from the bus stopped by yesterday. He watches the videos. He brought a get well card because he knew I had been sick. Well, not sick, but whatever this is, because I assure you all, I'm feeling fine. If it wasn't for this, I would feel like nothing was wrong. Anyway, so I want to say hi, George. And George, I'm going to see you at work when this video comes out, so I'll get a chance to say hi to you in person before you see the video. So hi, George. Thank you for the card. All right, metaphors. Today, we are talking about metaphors, similes, analogies, allegories, all of these figures of speech that we use commonly and routinely. We're going to see about identifying them and sort of teasing them apart, because sometimes it can be pretty gosh darn hard to tell the difference. So, what is a metaphor? Oh, by the way, we're starting in the middle and working our way out rather than starting, going from bigger to smaller or smaller to bigger. We're starting with metaphors and they fall in the middle. A metaphor is a word picture you use to create one idea and link it to another. It can be super simple. For example, I can say to you, my mother was a Victorian. Now, what I mean by that, and I'm sure you know what I mean by that, is, my mother was straight-laced and she had her hair in a bun and she wore long skirts and, she never saw the inside of a bar and she had no sense of humor. Whatever you associate with Victorians. And that's what a metaphor does. It allows us to tap into that huge body of shared cultural knowledge to describe something. So, I don't have to go through this long, lengthy list of stuff about my mother. I can just say my mother was a Victorian. I can't do that about my grandmother. If I say my grandmother was a Victorian, I'm just stating a fact. My grandmother was born in 1900. Victoria died in 1901. My grandmother was a Victorian. Of course, that's who she would be. It's a statement of fact. So with a metaphor, it is a comparison, comparing one concept to another concept. My mother, Victorian. That's how it works. Usually, but not always, the comparisons are a little over the top and a little fantastic. For example, my boss is a nightmare. Well, my boss couldn't possibly be a nightmare. My boss could give me nightmares, but my boss cannot literally be a nightmare. Not literally possible. It's not a statement of fact. And so there's that fantastical element. But not necessarily. Because I might say to you, my boss is a Mormon. And by that, I don't mean that my boss belongs to the Church of Latter-day Saints. I mean that he doesn't tolerate swearing in the office, and there's no liquor at the Christmas party, and if you want a smoke break, you better tell him you're going to the bathroom. And maybe he has 3 wives. By the way, that's a joke. I don't want to hear from the Mormons. I read the manifesto. I know what's going on. So, anyway, the fact is that a metaphor is an image. It's not real. That's the thing. So, even though my boss might literally be a Mormon, in this sense, I'm using it as a figure of speech. Same way I called my mother a Victorian, whereas my grandmother really was. So, let's talk about types of metaphors, because the other one we're going to talk about that people sort of confuse with metaphors is the simile. A simile is a type of metaphor, comparing 2 things. It's 2 things, they're being held up for comparison. Only the difference is a simile is a type of metaphor where the 2 things being compared are being directly compared. Okay? So, my boss is like a Mormon. So immediately you know it's a metaphor, because I didn't say he was a Mormon, I say he's like a Mormon. And that's your key for a simile. It uses words like, as, than. So, John was faster than lightning. Well, of course he wasn't. Not really. It's that element of fantasy. But it's the simile. John is being compared directly. That's why it's a special kind. Other kinds of metaphors are not such a direct comparison. John is slower than a tortoise. So remember, than, that's another word, simile. Very direct, head-on comparisons. Metaphors in general include similes, but you can use other kinds of metaphors. It was a blue and gloomy day. It wasn't. It couldn't be. The day can't be blue. Sky can be blue. The day can't be blue. The day can't really be gloomy. It's a day. It can't be gloomy. This is metaphorical. But that's not a direct comparison. It's broader. One thing to describe another, whereas the simile is exact. This is that. This is like that. This is as that. This is greater or less than. Head-on comparison. So, the other thing I want to mention before I forget is mixed metaphors. I'm sure you've all heard of this. And I remember my first mixed metaphor. When I was learning about metaphors, I was 9 years old. I was in the 4th grade. And I just wrote down my metaphors. That's what we were supposed to do. The assignment was write down a metaphor. Well, my metaphor was when the shoe is on the other foot, it's a horse of a different color. That's a mixed metaphor. We got shoes, we got horses, we got people feet, we got horse feet. And my teacher laughed about that all afternoon, which was a little embarrassing, but it stuck with me. I could have extended the metaphor by saying when the shoe is on the other foot, you'll find it might pinch a bit. It's the extension of the metaphor. Makes the same point. I'm basically saying, when you find it's your turn to be in this situation, you might not like the judgment you're making, which is usually the way those expressions are intended. But if we look at something like when the shoe is on the other foot, that's complete metaphor, has nothing to do with shoes, nothing to do with feet, but as you can see, it's not a comparison. It's not an exact comparison, but it's a more abstract comparison. So the simile is direct, head-on. The metaphor in general is more abstracted. You're pulling back a step. You're looking at a bigger picture. And this is where analogy comes in. All right. So to look at analogies, let's go back to our boss. Suppose I were to say, instead of my boss being a nightmare, my boss was growling like a lion this morning. It's a simile. Remember, we have the word like in there. He's growling like a lion. So I'm talking about the way he was, yammering this morning. I could have said, my boss was, not like, was a growling lion this morning. Again, he's not literally a lion, but it's not a simile. This is a metaphor, but it's not that specific head-to-head comparison metaphor. The analogy would have been if I said, going into my boss's office this morning would have been like going into a lion's den. That's the analogy. So, what's the difference here? The analogy explains, it brings another layer of meaning into this. I'm not just talking about my boss anymore. I'm not talking about him being like a lion. I'm not talking about him growling and grumbling. I'm talking about what's going to happen to me if I go into his office. So I'm pulling it back a further level of abstraction, you see, because the analogy is a metaphor that explains things. An ordinary metaphor, just your basic metaphor, compares, but the analogy throws on a layer of explanation on top of this. Are you actually going to just stand there staring at me? I'm not inviting you up. Just stay there. It explains, in this case, it's explaining what I would expect to meet if I went into my boss's office. It would be like going into a lion's den, because I want to connect to a bigger piece of that sort of cultural knowledge that we all have, which is lions are dangerous, you get your head bitten off, only crazy people go into the lion's den, etc., etc. So, let's go one further, and let's talk about allegories. An allegory is an even more elaborate metaphor, because an allegory is an entire story or poem or picture that has that comparison. So, your kid goes to school the first day. You pull them aside and you say, Sally, let me tell you the story about the brave little mouse. The brave little mouse had her little mouse lunchbox packed with her little bit of cheese, and she went off to mouse school where she could play with the other mice and they could sing mouse songs, and they had their little mouse teacher. You see, you're telling her the story about a mouse, but what you're really saying is, Sally, I'm talking about you. So, allegories can be so simple that you can actually hand them off to 5-year-old kids, and we do this all the time, knowing that the 5-year-old mind is going to absorb that and understand that we're comparing them to the mouse. We're telling them the mouse story, but what we are really saying is, this is about you. That tells you how basic this stuff is, that a small child on their first day of kindergarten will understand and respond to this. Now, the reason I thought we would talk about metaphors, similes, analogies, and allegories is because I use them constantly. Most of the people I know use metaphors to the point where I'm beginning to wonder how much of our brains are wired for metaphors. I wrote an email this morning to someone and said, I'll touch base with you later this week. It's a metaphor. She's in Texas, I'm in Pennsylvania. Well, Fenway Park is in Boston last time I checked, and neither one of us are going there and putting our finger on the base. We're not. But it has meaning for her because sports metaphors are all over the place. I mean, hit a home run, knock it out of the park, it's the whole ball game. It's just, and we use that as shorthand for bigger concepts, more complicated concepts, or to just tap in to the right image to resonate with the person we're communicating with. I consider metaphors extremely important. I think in metaphors, I really do. And when if I have to actually stop and think about it, it's hard for me to come up with them. But I use metaphors constantly. Like I said, to the point where I'm wondering the extent to which my brain is hardwired into the whole concept of metaphor. Everything is a metaphor to me. That's the way the cookie crumbles. It's so common, these expressions that just trip off our tongue. And because we use them all the time, and because a good metaphor, a good simile, a good analogy, a good allegory can improve our ability to communicate with others, whether we're speaking or writing, or, as I say, even painting. You can do the same thing with artwork. It tells a story. I don't do that. I'm not an artist, but I would be more than willing to bet that if we asked Lisa, how much allegory, how much metaphor is in her art, she would say, oh yeah, I am making points. I am expressing something. And we all see that, because when we see that in art, it resonates with us. So that's why I thought we would do this today, so that we would know what they are, so that we would feel more comfortable using them, so that we'd be cautious about mixing our metaphors. And by the way, mixed metaphors, I love mixed metaphors. I really do. I think you need to have a sense of humor about these things. If you mix your metaphors intentionally, that's one thing. You don't want to mix them by accident. So, if you start off with a metaphor about a ball game, stick with the ball game. If you start off with a cooking metaphor, the can't take the heat. Get out of the kitchen. Breaking eggs to make omelets, etc., etc. Stick with that. But once again, even those, it's obvious the extent to which they are in our lives, and we need to be able to identify them and use them effectively. Because if you stop and think about it, just think about it, there are ideas that you can communicate in an instant, in a flash, just by switching over to something that your listener or your reader already knows. They probably already know baseball. They probably already know football. Unfortunately, war is a really good metaphor. Blow you away. Blow them out of the water, They're there. And you can tap into that. It can be a quick and easy way to get your point across, to get your argument understood, so that somebody is actually hearing what you're saying. And that's the essence of communication. All right, so give me your thoughts and feedback, what you would like next time out. I will keep you posted on my bizarre little health journey. Oh, I forgot to tell you, this is my PS. This was very validating. I told you I had started taking medication on my own as soon as I realized this was Bell's palsy. I went in, I grabbed what I had, and said, "Oh, I'm taking this, I'm taking that." Well, as it turns out, that's what my doctor prescribed. So I was taking the right drugs. Unfortunately, I had the right drugs available to me. So I was, okay, all right. So I was, in fact, being treated by me and not a real doctor, but still, immediately. But it was very validating to find out that my little pharmacy is sufficiently well stocked to deal with something like this. As I say, I will keep you posted. We're still looking at something that is temporary. I have not had any COVID test results yet. I haven't even had the test. I haven't even gotten the phone call from the hospital yet. I will let you know every step of the way. And I'm also going to let you know about the test process too, because it seems to me that's something that we should all know about, because it might be valuable to some of you. All right, come here, Audie. Say goodbye. Say, we'll see you Friday. All right, no, he's not going to talk to you. Okay, we'll see you Friday.